I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I'd have to tell someone the story of my betrayal, or rather, the betrayal I experienced. We usually read about it in books, watch it in movies, discuss other people's dramas in the kitchen with friends, but it always seems like it's somewhere out there, far away. And that it won't happen to you. You're confident you know your partner, confident in yourself, in your family, confident that everything is more or less stable. But then, one day, one conversation, one glance at someone else's phone, and your familiar world collapses like a house of cards. My name is Alina. I'm 32. Until recently, I was married to a man I considered the love of my life. His name is Artyom. We met when I was 21. A student party, noise, music, and him, in a denim jacket, with a smile that immediately knocked the wind out from under me. Since that evening, we've been practically inseparable. I lived in anticipation of his calls. He'd come to my classes, waiting outside the university with coffee in his hands. It was like a beautiful story from a movie. When we got married 4 years later, I was sure that everything would be fine. Only happy years would follow. Children, trips together, buying furniture and appliances, renovating the apartment, a dog. You know, all that stuff. Ordinary, but so desirable. I felt safe, as if I'd found my haven, and now there would be no more storms. 8 years of marriage passed. Of course, there were arguments, difficult periods, and everyday life, but I always believed that it was normal, that all couples go through this. We bought an apartment with a mortgage and renovated it. I worked at a school, teaching literature. Artyom worked in it, spent a lot of time at the computer, sometimes staying late. We didn't always have enough time for each other, but I felt we were close enough to withstand any trials. I often remember one evening. It was 6 months before I learned the truth. We were sitting in the kitchen. I was making tea. He was scrolling through his news feed. I asked, "Are you happy?" He looked up and smiled, a little tiredly, but still warmly. "Of course I'm happy," he said. "With you." Then I believed him. Lord, I would have given anything for him to tell the truth right then. If the happiness had already been lost in fidelity, it doesn't appear suddenly, like lightning from a clear sky. It begins gradually. Small signs that we turn a blind eye to. Work-related calls in the evening. The phone he started carrying with him even to the bathroom. A new shirt, even though he wasn't a fan of clothes. Office friends he'd never heard of. I noticed all this, but I didn't want to believe it. I told myself, what nonsense. He's just got new projects. He's just tired. He's going through a midlife crisis. I even confided in my friends that Artyom had become strange, but then immediately defended him. Well, what can you expect from him at their recycling company? My naivety was both my salvation and my doom. One evening, he was late, as usual. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking out the window, and suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to call him. not to control him, but simply to hear his voice. I dialed his number. He didn't pick up. 5 minutes later, he called back. "Sorry, I'm in a meeting," he said quickly. "Is it urgent?" "No, I just missed you." He paused for a few seconds. Then he said, "I'll be there soon." And he arrived with flowers. A huge bouquet of white roses, even though he'd never done anything like that without a reason before. Then I melted. I decided I'd imagined it all, that I'd just worked myself up. But the flowers weren't a declaration of love. They were an atonement. The truth hit me unexpectedly. It seemed like a trivial situation. I woke up in the middle of the night because he hadn't gone to bed. I heard him quietly talking on the phone in the kitchen. His words were fragments of sentences, half whispers. I went out, he winced, and quickly hung up. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "Just work," he answered too quickly. "At 2 in the morning." He tried to smile, but I could already see the corner of his mouth twitching. I went back to the bedroom, but I couldn't fall back asleep. My heart was pounding like crazy. The next day, I decided to take his phone for the first time. I'd always believed that trust was the foundation of marriage, and I'd never checked. But at that moment, something inside me already knew. The phone wasn't password protected. I opened the messenger. And there it was. It was all there. "Can't wait to see you. You're the most beautiful. I can't forget last night." It was like an electric shock. My hands shook, my breath caught in my throat. I reread it over and over, disbelieving my eyes. I took screenshots, as if that would help preserve evidence. I sat in the kitchen, phone in hand, and didn't know what to do. Should I scream? Run? Throw him out of the apartment right away? Or wait until he came back and tell me? When he came home that evening, I already knew I couldn't keep quiet. "We're talking," I said, my voice shaking. He looked at me, frowned. He sat down at the table. "What happened?" I put the phone in front of him. "That's what happened." He turned pale. He looked down. He was silent for a long time, too long. And then he said, "Alina, this is a mistake." A mistake. 2 months of texting. Meetings in hotels. Words he never said to me. A mistake. I laughed. My laughter was hysterical, angry I didn't recognize myself. A mistake. "Are you kidding me?" He tried to explain. "I'm confused. It doesn't mean anything. I love you, honestly." But every word he said only tore me apart more. I barely remember that night. The tears, the screams, his attempts to hug me, my hysterics. I didn't sleep until morning, sitting in the kitchen, staring into space. I went to work that morning like a robot, but those messages were in front of my eyes all day. I didn't know what to do next. Forgive. Leave. I grew up in a family where my parents had been together their whole lives, and marriage had always been sacred to me. But for the first time, I understood betrayal. It was like poison. It penetrated every cell of my being. The next day, I met with a friend. I told her everything. She looked at me with sympathy and said, "Lina, he betrayed you. And he will betray you again. You don't change people like that." "But I love him," I whispered. "Love is when you're cherished." These words stuck in my head. But I lacked the resolve then. I returned home, where he sat guilty, miserable, and said he was ready to fix everything. I gave him a chance. Because it was so scary to admit. 8 years of my life had been a lie. And he arrived. With flowers. A huge bouquet of white roses, even though he'd never done anything like that without a reason before. Then I melted. I decided I'd imagined it all. That I'd just worked myself up. But the flowers weren't a declaration of love. They were an atonement. The truth hit me unexpectedly. It seemed like a trivial situation. I woke up in the middle of the night because he hadn't gone to bed. I heard him quietly talking on the phone in the kitchen. His words were fragments of sentences, half whispers. I went out, he winced, and quickly hung up. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "Just work," he answered too quickly. "At 2 in the morning." He tried to smile, but I could already see the corner of his mouth twitching. I went back to the bedroom, but I couldn't fall back asleep. My heart was pounding like crazy. The next day, I decided to take his phone for the first time. I'd always believed that trust was the foundation of marriage, and I'd never checked. But at that moment, something inside me already knew. The phone wasn't password protected. I opened the messenger. And there it was. It was all there. "Can't wait to see you. You're the most beautiful. I can't forget last night." It was like an electric shock. My hands shook, my breath caught in my throat. I reread it over and over, disbelieving my eyes. I took screenshots, as if that would help preserve evidence. I sat in the kitchen, phone in hand, and didn't know what to do. Should I scream? Run? Throw him out of the apartment right away? Or wait until he came back and tell me? When he came home that evening, I already knew I couldn't keep quiet. "We're talking," I said, my voice shaking. He looked at me, frowned. He sat down at the table. "What happened?" I put the phone in front of him. "That's what happened." He turned pale. He looked down. He was silent for a long time, too long. And then he said, "Alina, this is a mistake. A mistake. 2 months of texting. Meetings in hotels. Words he never said to me. A mistake." I laughed. My laughter was hysterical, angry. I didn't recognize myself. "A mistake? Are you kidding me?" He tried to explain. "I'm confused. It doesn't mean anything. I love you, honestly." But every word he said only tore me apart more. I barely remember that night. The tears, the screams, his attempts to hug me, my hysterics. I didn't sleep until morning, sitting in the kitchen, staring into space. I went to work that morning like a robot, but those messages were in front of my eyes all day. I didn't know what to do next. Forgive. Leave. I grew up in a family where my parents had been together their whole lives, and marriage had always been sacred to me. But for the first time, I understood betrayal. It was like poison. It penetrated every cell of my being. The next day, I met with a friend. I told her everything. She looked at me with sympathy and said, "Lina, he betrayed you. And he will betray you again. You don't change people like that." "But I love him," I whispered. "Love is when you're cherished." These words stuck in my head. But I lacked the resolve then. I returned home, where he sat guilty, miserable, and said he was ready to fix everything. I gave him a chance. Because it was so scary to admit, 8 years of my life had been a lie. I gave him a chance. Although even then I realized it probably wasn't about saving the marriage, but about my own inability to let go. I wanted to believe that everything could be fixed, that we could start anew, that he would realize how much he'd hurt me and would do everything to earn my forgiveness. In the early days, he acted like he was trying. He constantly texted, "How are you? I love you. You're the best." He brought flowers, cooked dinner, suggested going out together. His face always had that guilty look of a child caught stealing. I looked at him and thought, maybe it really will get better. Maybe this is a crisis, stupidity, a momentary infatuation. I'd invested so much in this marriage. So much effort, time, emotion. Letting him go would have meant admitting those years were wasted. But every "I love you," he said now rang hollow. I caught myself checking his phone, reading his messages. I'd hear the ringtone and freeze. What if it's her? He'd smile at someone in a cafe, and I'd immediately feel a pang of jealousy, even pain. Living under such tension proved unbearable. I tried talking to him. Openly, honestly. "Artyom, just tell me one thing. Why?" He sighed, looking away. "I don't know. I don't understand it myself. It just happened somehow. By accident." By accident? You've been texting her, darling, for 2 months. By accident? He was silent. Sometimes he'd start making excuses. "We have a routine together. You're always tired, busy with school. I felt like I was losing you." These words cut me. Because yes, there was a routine. Yes, I came home tired after work. Sometimes I got angry that he was sitting at the computer. But is that a reason to ruin everything? Couldn't he have simply said, "I miss the warmth"? I increasingly understood. He was looking for excuses, not reasons. A week later, I accidentally discovered that he was still texting her. Less frequently, more cautiously, but he was still texting. That was the moment when something broke inside me. I remember sitting in the bathroom with the door closed, crying so hard I was shaking. The tears streamed down my face, clutching my head as if I could pull the pain out of me with my own hands. I felt humiliated. I'd let him stay, given him a chance, and he'd used it to continue lying. That was the first time I thought about divorce. Saying it out loud was the scariest thing. We were sitting in the kitchen that evening, eating dinner in silence. I looked at his hands, so familiar, strong, with the slender fingers I'd once kissed. And suddenly I heard my own voice. "Artyom, I want a divorce." He froze and put down his fork. "What? You heard me? I can't take it anymore." He jumped up and started pacing the kitchen. "No, Lina. Wait. You can't do this. We can fix everything. You're still talking to her. It doesn't mean anything." "It does mean anything to me." We argued until the night. He said he loved me, that it was a mistake, that he was ready for anything. I screamed that I didn't believe a word he said anymore. In the end, he cried. Real tears. It was the first time I'd seen him like this. Broken, desperate. He grabbed my hands. "I beg you, don't leave me." I broke free and went into the bedroom. I lay there in the dark, feeling only emptiness. The next few days were a blur. We shared an apartment, but it was like we were in different worlds. I avoided him. He tried to approach me, to talk, but I pushed him away. At work, colleagues would ask, "Are you okay?" I'd nod and smile, and then, in the teacher's restroom, I'd cry quietly, so no one would hear. That evening, I called my mother. But I didn't tell her anything. How could I tell my mother that my husband had betrayed me? That all her pride in her strong family was an illusion? I couldn't. I told my friends. They supported me. But each one had their own advice. Get rid of him. One said, "Think about it. Maybe you should forgive him." Another said, and that made me feel even more lost. One evening, I decided to go for a walk. Just walk down the street, breathe the fresh air, so I wouldn't suffocate within those walls. I walked past the houses, looking at people's windows. Someone's eating dinner, children are drawing, a man and a woman are laughing at the TV. But inside I feel only cold. I remembered how Artyom and I once dreamed of our own home, of traveling. How I imagined him holding my hand in old age. And suddenly I realized, all of that is gone. The thought crashed down like an avalanche. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and the tears began to flow again. When I got home, I said, "I'm moving out." He looked at me as if I'd slapped him. "What? Where?" "To a friend's. Until I decide what's next." He started begging, coaxing, promising. But I'd already made up my mind. I packed my suitcase. Not much. Clothes, makeup, documents. When I zipped it up, my heart broke. It felt like I was tearing a piece of my life away. He stood in the doorway, watching, not interfering. He just said quietly, "Please don't go." I walked past him and didn't look back. I stayed with a friend for a week. It was a strange time. I felt relieved to have escaped, but at the same time, I felt excruciating pain. I'd wake up in the night and instinctively reach for the empty space next to me. I caught myself wanting to call him. My friend was supportive, but she, too, was getting tired of my endless tears and conversations about him. I went to a psychologist for the first time. I felt like I couldn't cope alone. During the first session, I cried the whole time, unable to speak. I kept repeating, "Why did he do that? Why?" The psychologist said, "It's not you. His choice is not your fault." I didn't believe it then. But these words slowly began to take root within me. A week later, Artyom came to see me. He stood at the door, calling, texting. My friend said, "It's up to you." I came out. He was pale, thin, with dark circles under his eyes. He was holding a bag in his hands, my favorite pastries from the bakery. "Lina," he began, "I can't live without you. Come back. I'll break everything. I'll delete all my contacts. I'll prove to you." I looked at him and felt my heart betrayingly squeeze again. Part of me wanted to rush to him, hug him, forget everything. But another part already understood. It was a vicious circle. I said, "Artyom, I need time." He nodded. "I'll wait." And he left. Those words, "I need time," became my survival formula. I didn't know if I wanted to go back. But I knew that right now, I couldn't. I lived with a friend, went to work, and met with a psychologist. I learned to breathe without him. Sometimes I felt like it was getting easier. Other times, like I was falling into the abyss again. But gradually, I began to see, I could live without him. I could wake up, go get coffee, smile at a colleague. The world hadn't collapsed. Artyom continued to text. "Good morning. How are you? I miss you." I responded rarely, dryly. Sometimes I didn't respond at all. One day, he sent me, "I want us to have a child. Let's start all over again." These words angered me. A child? After everything? When I'm not even sure I trust him 1%. I realized he was trying to patch up the hole with a band-aid. But the wound was too deep. Time. They say it heals. I don't know if it does, but it certainly changes your perspective. The longer I lived apart from Artyom, the clearer it became. I was no longer the woman who blindly trusted him. And we were no longer the couple I'd once been so proud of. Weeks turned into months. I still wore the ring on my finger, even though I'd long since stopped feeling it. It felt somehow alien. Sometimes I caught myself instinctively reaching for it, only to stop myself. A war raged inside me. On one side were memories, the first time he gave me flowers, our bike rides, our summertime lying on the grass and gazing at the clouds. On the other side were his lies, his hands holding someone else, his darling messages. Sometimes I thought I'd go crazy from this roller coaster. I continued seeing a psychologist. She asked simple but devastating questions. "Lina, do you want to be with someone you don't trust?" "No." "But I love him." "What's more important to you?" love, or self-respect? I remained silent, because I didn't know the answer. One day she said, "You're clinging to the past. But the past is gone. There's only the present and the future. And it's up to you to decide what it will be." I replayed these words in my head dozens of times. At that time, I began to notice the world around me again. A colleague from school, Igor, a history teacher, began to linger near my office more often, joke, and help with paperwork. At first, I didn't pay attention, but then I suddenly realized I liked him. It was a strange feeling. I wasn't looking for anything new, but the very idea that someone else could make me smile seemed liberating. One day, we went out for coffee together after work. The conversation was light, without a hint of anything more. But for the first time in a long time, I laughed genuinely. And that same evening, I wrote to Artyom, "I'm not coming back." His reaction was a storm. First, "Please, don't do this. I'll fix it." Then threats, "You'll regret it." Then more tears, "I'm nothing without you." I held on, because deep down, I already knew it was over. We met again to discuss the divorce. We sat in a cafe, across from each other, like two strangers. "Lina," he said, "I understand I messed up. But maybe, let's try again." "No, Artyom." I looked straight into his eyes. "I don't believe you anymore." He lowered his head, silent, and suddenly said quietly, "I thought you'd forgive me." And in that moment, I realized he would never realize what he'd done. For him, cheating is a mistake that can be swept under the rug if a woman loves him enough. But for me, that's it. The divorce was a formality. Signing the papers took just a few minutes. But emotionally, it was like cutting off my own arm. I cried when I signed the papers. I cried when I left the registry office. I cried at night, hugging my pillow. But along with the pain, I felt a strange relief. As if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Artyom continued to write occasionally. "Are you happy? I miss you. Maybe we should talk." I didn't reply anymore. I was learning to live again. I learned to cook for myself, to fall asleep without him, to make plans without the we. And gradually I realized life wasn't over. It had just become different. A few months later, I saw Igor again. We had already seen each other at work, but that evening he invited me to the theater. I accepted. It was completely different. Calm. Pure. No hysterics or drama. I sat next to him and thought, this is it, the feeling I've forgotten. When it's easy to be with him. I didn't know where this would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I looked to the future not with fear, but with hope. I thought a lot about what happened. About the betrayal. About the pain. About what I'd been through. And I realized, the betrayal destroyed not only our marriage, but also that old version of me, the trusting one, willing to turn a blind eye for the sake of love. But in its place, a new me was born. One who values herself, One who isn't afraid to say no. One who knows. If someone betrays you once, it will always leave a scar. And with this knowledge, I moved on. As I write these lines, more than a year has passed. I'm divorced. I've rented an apartment. I've furnished it the way I like. I'm dating Igor. We're only at the beginning, but it's a bright beginning. Sometimes I still think about Artyom. Not with hatred, more with a wary sadness. He was a part of my life, and I won't erase that. But now it's the past. And I have a future. And I will never let anyone ruin it with lies again. After the divorce, I felt like I was learning to walk again. Every day was a challenge, from going to the store to returning home to an empty apartment. Before, I always knew Artyom was waiting for me outside the door, even if he was silent or sitting at the computer. But now silence. At first, this silence was terrifying. I left the TV on just to quiet the roar. I fell asleep with music playing, just to block out the emptiness around me. But then, gradually, I learned to appreciate it. This silence was my personal space. My island. I began to notice little things I'd never noticed before. The smell of my morning coffee when I brewed it myself. The sun falling on the windowsill. The freedom to buy what I liked at the store, not what was for the two of us. It turned out I could be happy with small joys. My friends were surprised at how quickly I came to my senses. But it was an illusion. In reality, I still carried the pain inside. I just learned not to show it. Sometimes memories would come flooding back. I'd be riding the bus and suddenly remember Artyom holding my hand, and my heart would clench. But I no longer sobbed uncontrollably. I simply sighed and let go. The psychologist said, "It's natural. 8 years is a chunk of life. You can't erase it in a month." And I learned to accept that. With Igor, everything developed slowly. He was very gentle. He didn't pry, didn't rush, didn't ask unnecessary questions. He was simply there. We went for walks after work, discussed books and movies, laughed at school stories. Sometimes he brought me coffee to my office, and it was so warm, so kind. I caught myself breathing easily with him. And it was a new sensation. With Artyom, things were always stormy, sometimes passion, sometimes scandals. But here, there's calm. It's like I'm floating on a calm river, not fighting a storm. At some point, I realized I no longer checked his phone. Or rather, I didn't feel the need to check it. And this became the main sign for me. I trust him. We started seeing each other more often. Our first real date happened almost by chance. He invited me to a concert, and I accepted. I put on my best dress, the very same one I'd once worn to the theater with Artyom. At first, it felt strange. I thought the dress held memories. But then I realized, it wasn't about the past, but about my life. I had the right to wear it again, only this time, with someone else. At the concert, he took my hand. I froze, my heart pounded, but I didn't pull my hand away. And suddenly I felt, yes, I'm ready. Of course, the fears were still there. I was afraid that everything would happen again. That I'd be deceived again. That I wouldn't be able to trust completely. One day, I told Igor point blank, I can't promise you anything serious. I'm still too broken. He smiled and replied, I don't need anything except your sincerity. And I burst into tears. Because that was the support I sorely needed. Artyom and I didn't communicate anymore. Occasionally, he still sent short messages. How are you? Are you happy? I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. I just didn't see the point. I understood. If I gave him even the slightest opening, he'd try to come back again. But the door was closed forever. 6 months after the divorce, I went on vacation alone for the first time. I chose a small town by the sea and rented a room from a local landlady. I walked along the beach during the day and sat in a cafe with a book in the evenings. It was both strange and wonderful. I was learning to be my own company. I was learning to enjoy solitude. And suddenly I noticed, I felt good. Not normal, not tolerable, but good. When I returned home, I felt different. Stronger. More confident. I no longer viewed the divorce as a catastrophe. On the contrary, I began to see it as a turning point. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it destroyed my world. But it gave me a chance to build a new one. Igor and I gradually became closer. He introduced me to his friends, and I introduced him to his girlfriends. We began planning trips together. I allowed myself to laugh, to rejoice, to make plans. Sometimes, when we were sitting together in the kitchen drinking tea, I caught myself thinking, this is real happiness. Without big words, without drama. Just happiness. And yet, my thoughts often returned to what had happened. Not because I missed Artyom, but because it was important for me to understand, why did all this happen? I came to the conclusion, the betrayal destroyed my marriage, but not me. On the contrary, it helped me find myself. I realized that love isn't blind faith, sacrifice, or eternal forgiveness. Love is respect. Without respect, there is no love. Now I'm no longer afraid of the word betrayal. I speak about it calmly. Yes, he betrayed me. Yes, it was terrible. But it's part of my story. And I'm not ashamed of it. Because it was through pain that I learned to value myself. Sometimes I think, what if it hadn't been for that night when I overheard his conversation? If I hadn't checked my phone, would I still be living in an illusion? Probably so. And maybe I would be happy out of habit. But I'm grateful to fate that everything was revealed. It may be painful, it may be hard, but it was honest. Igor and I don't have any wedding plans yet. I'm in no rush. It's important for me to live through everything gradually. But I'm no longer afraid of the future. I know, whatever it may be, I can handle it. Because I've learned to love myself. Artyom is like a closed book to me now. Sometimes I wonder how his life turned out. He didn't stay with that woman, I found out by accident. He's probably looking for someone new. But that's not my story anymore. My story is here, now. In my apartment, at my work, on my walks around the city, in my new relationship. And I like this story. A year has passed since the divorce. If someone had told me earlier that I could live without Artyom, that I could laugh, love again, make plans, I wouldn't have believed it. It felt like my world had completely collapsed. But now I know, sometimes, to build something new, you have to let the old collapse. I remember my first New Year's without him. I stayed home alone, even though a friend invited me over. I set a small table, salad, champagne, tangerines. Exactly at midnight, I raised my glass and said out loud, "Happy New Beginning, Alina." And for the first time in a long time, I smiled at myself in the mirror. Life was gradually getting back to normal. Work, meeting with friends, taking walks. Igor and I grew closer, but everything unfolded calmly, without rushing. He often repeated, "I like to see you laugh." And I caught myself thinking, yes, I really am laughing again. Not because I have to, not because I'm pretending, but because I want to. Being cheated on me once felt like the end of the world. Now I understand. It was a test. Cruel, painful, but it made me stronger. I've learned to listen to myself. Before, I lived more for us than for myself. Now I ask, what do I want? And I answer honestly. I've learned to say no. I used to think that was selfish. Now I know, it's self-care. I've learned to trust, but not blindly anymore. I know that trust is fragile, and if it's broken, it's almost impossible to restore. Sometimes memories come back to me. I can pass by our former favorite cafe and feel my heart clench. But these memories don't hurt anymore. They're just there. Like old, scarred skin. It doesn't hurt, but it reminds me. One spring, I ran into Artyom by chance. On the street. In the city center. He was walking alone, wearing headphones. Our eyes met, and he stopped. "Hello," he said. "Hello," I replied calmly. He looked at me intently, as if trying to read my face to see if I was happy. And I truly was. "You look good," he said. "Thank you." We stood awkwardly for a couple more minutes. Then he nodded and walked on. I watched him go and suddenly realized there was no longer any pain or anger in me. Only a slight sadness and gratitude for the lesson. I returned home that day and wrote in my diary, "I'm single." My relationship with Igor was becoming more and more serious. I don't know if it will last a lifetime. I don't know if we'll get married. But I've learned not to demand guarantees from life. I'm just living, and that's happiness in itself. He once said, "You know, you have such eyes. As if you've been through a lot of pain, but you still managed to shine." And I thought, yes, he's right. There was pain. but I didn't let it extinguish my light. Now I know, cheating isn't the end. It's a transition to a new stage, to a new version of myself. Yes, I lost the man I trusted, but I found the most important thing, me. I'd like to tell those who are going through something similar, the pain will pass. It won't go away instantly. It won't vanish without a trace. But one day you will wake up and realize you can breathe again, laugh, love, and you will be different, stronger, wiser, purer. Today, I live not in the past, but in the present. I have a job I love, friends with whom I can laugh until I cry. I have a man who respects me and doesn't try to fill the void with promises. I have myself, the person I've finally learned to love. And that's the most precious thing. If I could go back to that morning when I first opened his phone, I would still do it. Because that was the moment my real life began. The pain was unbearable. But if not for it, I would have continued to live in an illusion, closing my eyes. And now I live with my eyes open. I look in the mirror and see a woman who survived betrayal. But she didn't break. She became stronger. And if one day I marry again, it will be a different marriage. Honest, equal, real. And if not, I will still be happy. Because I no longer look for what I lack in others. I found this within myself. And this is my greatest victory.